Have you ever sacrificed everything for a deeper truth? In 1998, Madonna discovered ancient Kabbalah teachings that would heal her broken heart, but cost her the respect of an entire industry. What happened next proved that sometimes the most controversial choices lead to the most authentic life. It was March 15, 1998, in a small, dimly lit study room above a bookstore in Los Angeles. Madonna sat cross-legged on a simple cushion, surrounded by ancient Hebrew texts and flickering candles. She had just gone through the most devastating year of her life, a brutal custody battle, tabloid scandals, and a string of failed relationships that left her questioning everything she thought she knew about love, success, and happiness. The woman who had conquered the world through controversy was about to embark on the most controversial journey of her life, not through provocation, but through profound spiritual seeking. By 1998, Madonna had achieved everything the world told her would make her happy. She was the best-selling female artist of all time, had conquered film and fashion, and was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But behind the glamorous facade, she was drowning in emptiness. The custody battle with Carlos León over their daughter Lourdes had been particularly brutal. The media painted her as an unfit mother. Her romantic relationships kept failing spectacularly, and despite being surrounded by people, she felt more alone than ever. "I had everything I thought I wanted," Madonna later revealed in a rare interview, "but I felt like I was dying inside. Success couldn't fill the hole in my soul." It was during this dark period that a friend mentioned a Kabbalah study group meeting in West Hollywood. Madonna had always been drawn to mysticism and esoteric knowledge, but she had never found anything that spoke to her about her deepest questions about existence, suffering, and the meaning of life. That friend was Sandra Bernhardt, who had been studying Jewish mysticism for several years. "You need to meet Rabbi Berg," Sandra told her during a late-night phone call when Madonna was crying about feeling lost. "This isn't about religion, it's about understanding the spiritual mechanics of the universe." The Kabbalah Center on Robertson Boulevard was unlike any spiritual space Madonna had ever entered. There were no golden altars, no elaborate decorations, just simple white walls, Hebrew texts, and an energy that felt both ancient and urgent. Rabbi Philip Berg, the center's leader, was a small, elderly man with piercing eyes who seemed to see straight through Madonna's celebrity facade to her wounded soul. When she introduced herself, he simply nodded and said, "I know who you are in the world, but who are you to yourself?" That question hit Madonna like a lightning bolt. For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking her about her next album, her love life, or her controversies. They were asking about her essence. The study session that night focused on the concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world through spiritual work and personal transformation. As Rabbi Berg explained how individual healing contributes to universal healing, Madonna felt something shift inside her chest. "I realized I had spent my entire career trying to shock people awake," she later reflected, "but I had never tried to wake myself up." Over the following months, Madonna threw herself into Kabbalah study with the same intensity she had once devoted to perfecting her stage performances. She began attending classes 3 times a week, studying Hebrew, and incorporating ancient Jewish prayers into her daily routine. The red string bracelet became her constant companion, not as a fashion statement, but as a reminder of the protective power of spiritual intention. She began each day with meditation and ended it reading from the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah. But as Madonna's spiritual practice deepened, something unexpected began happening in her professional and social life. The friends and colleagues who had once surrounded her started pulling away. At first, I thought they'd be happy that I was finding peace, Madonna recalled. Instead, they seemed threatened by it. The entertainment industry that had celebrated Madonna's rebelliousness suddenly turned cold when that rebellion became spiritual seeking. Directors who had once courted her stopped calling. Fellow musicians made jokes about her religious phase in interviews. At industry parties, conversations would stop when she entered the room. The breaking point came at a high-profile Hollywood party in late 1998. Madonna arrived wearing simple clothes and no makeup, radiating a calm energy that was completely different from her usual commanding presence. Instead of networking and promoting herself, she spent the evening in quiet conversations about meaning and purpose. "She's lost her edge," she overheard one producer whisper to another. "The Madonna we knew is gone." But perhaps the most painful rejection came from someone much closer to home. Warren Beatty, whom Madonna had dated and considered a close friend, pulled her aside that night with a concerned expression. "Madonna, this Kabbalah thing is making people uncomfortable. You're starting to sound like you're in a cult. It's affecting your career and your reputation." Madonna looked at him with sad clarity. "Warren, for the first time in my life, I'm not performing for other people's comfort. I'm living for my soul's truth." That conversation marked the end of their friendship. As word spread about Madonna's deep involvement with Kabbalah, the tabloid media went into overdrive. Headlines screamed about her cult involvement and religious breakdown. Paparazzi followed her to the Kabbalah Center, turning her spiritual practice into entertainment news. The coverage was particularly cruel because it misrepresented everything Madonna was experiencing. What was actually a profound journey of healing and self-discovery was portrayed as celebrity eccentricity or, worse, mental instability. Madonna's Kabbalah obsession, as she lost her mind, read one particularly vicious magazine cover. But perhaps the most hurtful attacks came from within the entertainment industry itself. At the 1999 MTV Video Music Awards, several presenters made jokes about Madonna's spiritual beliefs. Chris Rock quipped, "Madonna's so into Kabbalah now, she thinks the red carpet is actually a red string bracelet." The audience laughed, but Madonna, watching from backstage, felt each joke like a knife wound. She was being ridiculed for the first genuine spiritual growth of her life. By 2000, the social cost of Madonna's spiritual journey had become clear. Many of her A-list friendships had dissolved. Industry colleagues treated her with a mixture of pity and skepticism. Even some family members questioned whether she had gone too far with her religious studies. The isolation was particularly painful during holidays and industry events. Madonna found herself increasingly alone at gatherings where she had once been the center of attention. But instead of the desperate loneliness she had felt before Kabbalah, this solitude felt different, cleaner, more chosen. "I realized I had confused being surrounded by people with being truly connected," she later explained. "Most of my relationships had been based on what I could do for others or what they could do for me. Very few were based on who I actually was." The professional consequences were equally significant. Several major film roles were offered to other actresses, with producers privately citing concerns about Madonna's religious phase. Record executives pressured her to return to more controversial, commercially viable material. But Madonna had tasted something she had never experienced before: inner peace, and she wasn't willing to trade it for external approval. The turning point came during Rosh Hashanah 2000, when Madonna experienced what she could only describe as a profound spiritual awakening during services at the Kabbalah Center. As she participated in the ritual of Tashlich, symbolically casting away sins by throwing bread into water, she felt a lifetime of pain, resentment, and spiritual hunger lift from her shoulders. "I threw that bread into the water, and with it went every false identity I had ever worn," she later wrote in her journal.
For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't Madonna the pop star, Madonna the provocateur, or Madonna the tabloid target. I was just a soul seeking connection with the divine. That night, sitting alone in her apartment, Madonna made a decision that would define the next phase of her life. She would not apologize for her spiritual growth, would not tone down her practices to make others comfortable, and would not return to the empty pursuit of fame for its own sake. She began incorporating Kabbalah themes directly into her music, starting with the album Music in 2000. Songs like Gone and What It Feels Like for a Girl reflected her new understanding of spiritual transformation and authentic self-expression. But choosing authenticity over acceptance came with a price that Madonna hadn't fully anticipated. Industry events became increasingly awkward. Old friends didn't know how to relate to this more introspective, spiritually focused version of the woman they had once known. At the 2001 Grammy Awards, Madonna sat at a table surrounded by industry executives who spent the entire evening making small talk and avoiding any mention of her spiritual beliefs. She realized that her transformation had created a barrier between her and a world that only knew how to relate to the performance, not the person. "I felt like I was speaking a different language," she recalled. Everything they cared about, the gossip, the competition, the superficial drama, felt like it was happening on another planet. But Madonna also began attracting a different kind of relationship. Spiritual seekers, artists interested in deeper meaning, and people going through their own transformations began entering her life. These connections, though fewer in number, felt more substantial and nourishing. As Madonna's spiritual practice matured, she began to understand that the loneliness she experienced was actually a form of spiritual preparation. The removal of superficial relationships created space for a deeper relationship with herself and with the divine. She started spending more time in quiet meditation, studying ancient texts, and exploring the mystical dimensions of creativity. This solitude, which once terrified her, became a source of strength and inspiration.
"I realized that I had been afraid of being alone because I didn't know who I was without an audience," she reflected. "Kabbalah taught me that the most important relationship is the one you have with your own soul." This newfound comfort with solitude began reflecting in her art. Her 2003 album, American Life, was perhaps her most introspective and spiritually oriented work, addressing themes of materialism, authenticity, and the search for meaning in a superficial world. Madonna's commitment to her spiritual path, despite the social cost, began inspiring others in unexpected ways. Letters poured in from fans who had also felt alienated for their spiritual beliefs. Other celebrities quietly reached out, sharing their own struggles with balancing authentic growth and public expectations. Gwyneth Paltrow began studying Kabbalah after watching Madonna's transformation. "I saw how much peace it brought her, even when everyone was criticizing her for it," Paltrow later said. "It made me realize that spiritual growth is worth more than social approval." But perhaps more significantly, Madonna's example began changing conversations about spirituality in popular culture. Her willingness to risk ridicule for her beliefs opened space for other artists to explore and express their own spiritual journeys. By 2005, the tide had begun to turn. Madonna's consistency in her spiritual practice, combined with her continued artistic excellence, forced the industry to take her transformation seriously. Critics who had dismissed her Kabbalah involvement as a phase had to acknowledge that it had actually deepened and enriched her work. Her 2005 album, Confessions on a Dance Floor, seamlessly blended her spiritual insights with accessible pop music, proving that authenticity and commercial success weren't mutually exclusive. The spiritual themes that had once been criticized as too heavy were now praised as mature and evolved. More importantly, Madonna had found what she had been searching for her entire life: inner peace. The external validation she had once craved seemed less important when measured against the quiet satisfaction of living in alignment with her deepest values. Today, Madonna's spiritual journey is recognized as one of the most significant celebrity transformations of the modern era. Not because it was dramatic or controversial, but because it was genuine and sustained. She continues to study Kabbalah, to incorporate spiritual practices into her daily life, and to create art that reflects her inner growth. The friendships she had lost have been replaced by relationships built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than mutual utility.
I lost people who were never really friends, Madonna now says, and I found myself, which was the most valuable discovery of my life. Madonna's spiritual journey reminds us that the most important transformations often require us to disappoint other people's expectations. The courage to choose inner growth over outer approval is perhaps the most radical act in a culture that values performance over authenticity. Her story shows us that being misunderstood for following your spiritual truth is a small price to pay for the profound peace that comes from living in alignment with your deepest values. Sometimes the people who criticize your spiritual growth are the ones who need it most, but are too afraid to begin their own journey. Madonna chose divine connection over celebrity friendships, spiritual truth over social comfort, and authentic growth over artificial popularity. In doing so, she discovered that the approval of your own soul is worth more than the acceptance of an entire industry. If this story of spiritual courage over social conformity resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell for more stories about choosing authenticity over acceptance. Share this with someone who needs encouragement to follow their spiritual truth even when others don't understand. And let us know in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between your spiritual growth and other people's comfort? What did you learn from that choice? Remember, the path to authentic living often leads through the wilderness of misunderstanding. But on the other side of that wilderness lies the promised land of inner peace, and that journey is always worth taking.